Hi, this video is about molecular and ionic compounds. So what's the difference? Well, ionic compounds are made from a metal and a nonmetal, and the metal gives away an electron to the nonmetal. So what happens is the metal has formed cations, or positively charged ions, and the nonmetal has formed anions, or a negatively charged ion. And so this makes up a crystal lattice, and these positive ions are attracted to the negative ions. So it forms this nice organized crystal lattice that is held together by the fact that these opposite charges attract. So what are the physical properties of ionic compounds? These are important to remember. Well, ionic compounds have very high melting and boiling points. It takes a lot of energy, so really high temperatures, to break apart that crystal lattice. So the positive and negative charges, they're sometimes called electrostatic forces. They're very strong, and it's very hard to break them apart. Ionic compounds are also hard and they are brittle. Ionic compounds also conduct electricity, or they're called electrolytes, when they're dissolved in water. So when you put them in water, the ions separate and they conduct electricity. These ions are moving around in the water and they conduct a current. So in the picture below, you can see the water molecule here. You can see this is the oxygen and here are the hydrogens, and they're essentially pulling apart those ions. And so we're going to learn later that the hydrogen ends here have a slightly positive charge. And so the hydrogen, those slightly positive charges on the hydrogen, pull the chloride ion away from the slightly positive oxygen atom in the water molecule, pulls apart the sodium ion. I meant to say the slightly negative, oxygen atom pulls apart the positive sodium ion. So what happens here is in solution, when it's in water, we just have ions floating around, and this can conduct a current. Molten ionic compounds can also conduct a current. Now, when they're solids, they do not conduct a current because the ions aren't free floating around. They're stuck in that crystal lattice. But whenever you have an ionic compound dissolved in water or a molten ionic compound, they will conduct electricity. They're called electrolytes. Let's talk about molecular compounds. They use covalent bonding, and so sometimes they're called covalent compounds. So they're the same thing, molecular covalent compounds. These are made of all nonmetals, and the atoms are not usually organized in a crystal lattice at all. And so here you can see down in this picture, this I believe is sugar. It's just kind of like a blob of all the atoms together, and here are water molecules here, and there's no crystal lattice like we saw in the ionic compounds. And these atoms are connected by covalent bonds. Now, physical properties of molecular compounds are just about the opposite from ionic compounds. They have relatively low melting and boiling points. It doesn't take a lot of energy to separate one molecule from another. So basically, when you're melting these or you're boiling these, you're separating one huge glob from another glob. It doesn't break up into the individual atoms the way the ionic compound breaks up into individual ions. So molecular compounds usually are soft, and they're not those brittle solids that we saw with ionic compounds at room temperature. And molecular compounds do not conduct electricity when they are dissolved in water. So there are no ions present. So here are our water molecules, and see what's happening is they're pulling apart these, if this was sugar, they're pulling apart these big blobs from one another, and there are no ions present. And we are not actually breaking this down into individual atoms. So you still have like the carbon and the hydrogen and the oxygen all still covalently bonded. We're just separating one molecule from another. All right, so what I would like you to do to show me that you understood the contents of this video is to make a chart and list all the properties of ionic compounds, and then on the other side, list all the properties of molecular compounds. And be sure that you know these properties when you come to class. Have a good day.